before Robert Fisher wound up one of the FBI's 10 most wanted.
Happy birthday, dear Brittany.
He was a dad to Brittany and Bobby.
Don't say anything.
A husband to Mary.
Mary was sweet. She was, he would probably say she was a little difficult.
In April 2001, in Scottsdale, Arizona, the Fisher family's home exploded in a devastating fire. Inside, the bodies of Mary and her 2 kids were found, murdered before the fire even started. The prime suspect, Robert William Fisher, vanished without a trace. This is the story of the Fisher family murders. Robert William Fisher was born on April 13, 1961, in Brooklyn, New York City, as the middle child of William and Jan Fisher. In 1976, his parents divorced, which left Robert and his 2 sisters to move with their father to Arizona. They all went to Saguaro High School in Tucson, but the family's split had a lasting impact on Robert. Friends from his high school days remember him as being quite bitter about the divorce. In fact, he later talked frequently about it with his coworkers and revealed how much he felt his mother's departure had changed his life. Fisher joined the United States Navy and tried to become a SEAL, but he didn't make the cut. He loved the outdoors, and he particularly enjoyed hunting and fishing. After a stint as a firefighter in California, which ended due to a back injury, he moved his family to Arizona. There, he started working in the medical field and took on roles as a surgical catheter technician and respiratory therapist. In the late 1980s, he also worked briefly as a weed sprayer. One of his former employers described him as a quiet man who struggled with back pain but was reliable on the job. In 1987, Robert Fisher met and married Mary Cooper, and they seemed to have a solid relationship. They moved to Scottsdale, Arizona, where they built a life together with their 2 children and a black lab, living in the 2200 block of 74th Place. From the outside, they appeared to be a normal, church-going family as they were actively involved in their Baptist church. But as time went on, cracks began to show in their marriage.
He had a difficulty with his parents and the divorce that they'd gone through, and so he had told me he'd never go through that again.
In one particularly harsh incident, Fisher turned a garden hose on Mary after he felt she had spoken out of turn. He was also embarrassed that his son Bobby didn't share his passion for hunting and fishing. One time, he tried to teach Bobby and his daughter Brittany how to swim by throwing them off a boat. According to his hunting partner, Sandy Gillespie, the children were crying and Brittany was screaming. Fisher pulled them back into the boat and said, "Now there, how's that?" Fisher's controlling nature extended to the home, where he wouldn't allow the walls to be painted any color other than white, and only a few pictures were permitted on the walls. Mary's friend Kimberly Sue Davidson told police that Mary's mother had made special items like quilts several times, but Mary wasn't allowed to hang them up. Instead, she had to store them in the closet, with Robert constantly nagging her to get rid of them. Despite this, Fisher tried to maintain the image of a devoted family man. Mary took a job, which she described to friends as a security fund, while Robert worked at the Mayo Clinic's Scottsdale campus as a respiratory therapist and catheter technician. Though he was considered a good worker, his colleagues noticed that he often talked about his marital problems. He often mentioned how his parents' divorce had affected him, once saying that his life would have been much better if his mother Jan hadn't left his father. These issues even came up during his hunting and fishing trips, where he would discuss his struggles with his friends. In time, Fisher displayed even more disturbing behavior. There was a time where they had gotten an elk and were preparing it, and he randomly decided to smear the blood on his face as well as do other strange things. On another occasion, during a camping trip, he sneaked up behind some unsuspecting campers he didn't even know and fired his gun into the air multiple times just to scare them. Witnesses reported that he was smiling and laughing as he did this. More issues began to surface in his marriage, which caught the attention of their circle of friends. It was said that he showed more affection to his black Labrador retriever than to his family. In some home videos, his interactions with his family come across as very cold and odd. Robert William Fisher's first run-in with the law occurred in 1997 when he had a dispute over a stray football that apparently belonged to a neighbor. He claimed the dog kept coming onto his property and trying to attack the dog. and eventually, he shot the pit bull when it came onto his property. Of course, the police were called, and they believed that Robert had tried to get the dog onto his property on purpose as he hated it. Robert claimed otherwise, and we'll probably never know the full truth. Meanwhile, the clash between Robert and Mary got out of control. They even sought counseling from their pastor at church, but nothing seemed to help.
Mary was very involved. She served with the children's ministry. Her children were friends with my children.
Robert was extremely controlling. At that point, he wouldn't allow anything to be put up on the walls unless it was something he wanted. For example, Mary once received a tapestry from a relative, but Robert wouldn't let her hang it up. He constantly nagged her about various things. Ironically, neighbors living nearby at the time mentioned that during their frequent yelling matches, they could always hear Mary screaming, but they never actually heard Robert yelling. This might have been because Robert was trying to pretend like a gentle, loving family man, even though he wasn't. He had confided in his coworkers that the marriage was falling apart, but he also said, divorce is not an option. Mary, on the other hand, had told friends that she was planning to divorce Robert in the coming weeks. On the night of April 9th, 2001, neighbors reported hearing another massive fight coming from the Fisher household at around 10:30 in the evening. And in a sudden moment, everything caught fire.
There are people in there and this whole house exploded.
The shockwave shook homes, and within moments, 911 calls started flooding in from nearly every neighborhood nearby. The explosion was so powerful that it blew out the brick wall of the Fisher house. It was an intense, fully involved fire with flames towering over 20 feet high.
Big fire.
Can you see it?
Big fire. You bet I can see it. Some house just exploded and ignited on fire.
The firefighters focused on keeping the fire from spreading to the closely packed neighboring houses. As they tried to put out the fire, they had no idea what they were dealing with or whether anyone was trapped inside. Once they finally got the fire under control and extinguished, they started to investigate. It was then that they noticed one of the Fisher family vehicles, Mary's 4Runner, was missing. There was a brief hope that the family had left before the explosion, unaware of the tragedy. But that hope quickly faded. The explosion had been so powerful that it had even damaged Robert's truck, which had been parked right in front of the house. As investigators began sifting through the rubble, they brought in the forensics team to piece what had actually happened. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for them to make a discovery: the remains of 3 bodies. At first, it was assumed that they had died in the fire, but a closer examination revealed something far more disturbing. The forensics team uncovered evidence that pointed to foul play. They found a hose leading into the furnace that had been pulled out on purpose, and nearby, a candle had been set on the floor next to accelerants like gasoline. It became clear that this was a staged scene. Someone had planned this to either cover up evidence or buy themselves more time. At this point, the investigators were uncertain about many details, but what they learned from the medical examiner was even more horrifying. The bodies discovered were those of Robert Fisher's family, his wife Mary Cooper, and his 2 children, Brittany Fisher, as well as Robert Bobby William Fisher Jr. The examination revealed that they had been murdered before the fire started. One item that survived the fire was Robert Fisher's gun safe, which had several weapons in it. However, his handgun was missing. Along with the weapons, the safe also held some movies and some other personal items. On the evening of the murders, Fisher was captured on a surveillance tape at an ATM machine around 10:40 p.m. He withdrew the daily maximum of $280. In the footage, he was seen wearing an Oakland Raiders cap, and you can see Mary's white 4Runner in the background. Most authorities and investigators involved in the case believe this transaction took place after the crime. At first, it took a few days before Fisher was officially listed as a suspect or even a person of interest, but as the pieces began to come together, they realized that he most likely had some kind of involvement or was the guilty party. Nothing seemed to add up if he were innocent. Why didn't he come home? If he had just been out blowing off steam and something like this happened to his family by chance, it would be an unimaginable coincidence. There was also the fact that all of his clothes had been removed from the house. Why would he take all of his clothes and withdraw that money unless he was planning to flee? Eventually, Robert William Fisher was charged with 3 counts of felony murder, 1 count of felony arson, and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. Pictures and posters of him were distributed widely. Fisher was a white male, roughly 6 feet tall. At the time of his disappearance, he weighed about 180 pounds, though his current weight is unknown if he is still alive. He has a surgical scar on his lower back and a gold upper bicuspid tooth, which she could have had removed. After finding Mary Fisher's car in Tonto National Forest, the police faced challenging weather conditions as foul weather and snow moved into the area. This forced the suspension of the search, which only covered about a mile around the vehicle's location. Footsteps were found leading toward the Fort Apache Indian Reservation, but that area was never thoroughly searched. This has led many, including those who have followed or investigated the case, to speculate that Robert Fisher may have reached the reservation and either got help or found a ride which led him to escape. The failure to locate Fisher in the immediate area around the vehicle was a huge disappointment to the police. They followed a set of footprints leading onto the reservation, but found no sign of Fisher. A couple reported seeing a man resembling Fisher walking along the nearby Young Road several days before the car was found, but they didn't report the sighting until after the vehicle was discovered. Lori Greenbeck, an acquaintance of the Fisher family, mentioned that her husband had gone camping with Fisher in the area where the truck was found shortly before April 10th. She believed Fisher was familiar with the region and might have been scouting it out. The police had hoped that finding the car would quickly lead to his arrest, but as more time passed without any sign of him, the case grew colder. With the lack of new leads, the FBI eventually became involved, and in June 2001, Robert William Fisher was added to the FBI's 10 Most Wanted list as the 475th person ever to be placed on it. The police believed that the increased publicity from being on the list, along with the coverage on shows like America's Most Wanted and The Hunt with John Walsh, would lead to his capture. By April 2003, the FBI had received hundreds and hundreds of leads. However, all reported sightings of Fisher have either been inconclusive or proven false.
He's a survivalist, that he's out there living in the woods.
To do that as an individual is usually a death card.
Professional survival instructor Cody Lundeen is as blunt as he is barefoot.
Okay, you've come here to talk to me about, is it possible for this guy to live off the land for 20 years? And my short answer is hell no.
For starters, investigators say there hasn't been any sign of someone living in the woods.
In 2009, a bizarre incident in Guatemala fueled speculation that Robert William Fisher might still be alive. A couple of tourists were taking photographs when a Caucasian male who was aggressive and visibly upset approached them. He demanded that they delete any pictures in which he might have appeared in the background. His behavior was so erratic and forceful that it drew the attention of the local police. The man's reaction seemed highly unusual, and his demeanor and actions matched some of Fisher's known tendencies. The second, and perhaps most well-known potential sighting of Fisher, occurred in 2004 in White Rock, which is a suburb of Vancouver, Canada. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrested a man who they suspected was Fisher. The man had a missing tooth in the same spot where Fisher had a gold bicuspid, as well as a similar surgical scar on his back. Additionally, his age, height, and weight were almost identical to Fisher's at the time. Having found all these similarities, the RCMP contacted American authorities, who then conducted a fingerprint analysis.
I received a phone call from the Canadian police, who put me in touch with the person who ultimately became my client. He was in police custody.
Contrary to what they believed, the results definitively proved that the man was not Robert William Fisher. But even after the fingerprints cleared him, some of Fisher's former neighbors and people who knew him well were convinced that this man was indeed Fisher. His mother had to come forward with his birth certificate, family photographs, and other personal documents to definitively prove his identity and eliminate him as a suspect. Despite this, some newspapers reported that Fisher had been captured in Canada, which added unnecessary stress to the situation. Before Troy James Knapp, the notorious Utah cabin burglar, was identified and captured, many people speculated that he might be Robert William Fisher. Knapp, who was known for living off the grid and ransacking remote cabins, fit the image of someone like Fisher, who was believed to be capable of surviving in the wilderness. But this theory was also debunked when Knapp was conclusively identified as a different individual. In 2012, the FBI alerted local law enforcement that Fisher might have been living near where Mary's car was found. Then, in October 2014, police raided a house in Commerce City, Colorado, after receiving a tip that Fisher was hiding there. Although they arrested 2 people, they found no sign of him. Another lead emerged in Commerce City, Colorado, in October 2014. The tip seemed promising enough for the police to launch an operation, but unfortunately, it did not lead to Fisher. However, the investigation did result in the arrest of 2 other criminals that the police had been searching for. To this day, Robert William Fisher remains at large, and no confirmed sightings of him have surfaced. But there are a lot of theories about his whereabouts. Some believe he may have taken his own life in the Tonto National Forest, where his wife's car was found, possibly in one of the many caves in the area. However, investigators and profilers generally discount this theory, arguing that Fisher's personality, which was marked by arrogance and a strong sense of self-preservation, would make suicide an unlikely outcome. On the 15th anniversary of the murders in April 2016, FBI officials and Scottsdale police held a news conference where they displayed age-enhanced photos of Fisher, hoping to reignite public interest in the case. On November 3, 2021, Fisher was removed from the FBI's 10 most wanted list. He was replaced by Julian Adonai Archega Carillas, the alleged leader of MS-13 in Honduras, and the 526th addition to the list. The FBI explained that despite the nearly 20 years of extensive publicity, Fisher's case had not resulted in his location or capture, meaning it no longer met the criteria for their list. But Fisher still remains a wanted fugitive. A lot of people think that he most likely survived and potentially started a new life under a fake identity. If this is the case, it is possible that Fisher died after years as a fugitive without his remains being identified. Another theory suggests that he might have used his survival skills to continue living in the wilderness near Payson, Arizona, where his wife's car was discovered. But the police and survival experts are skeptical of this due to the difficulty of finding food and shelter in that environment and the lack of evidence of anyone living in those woods. He could be living in a small town where he gets paid cash and works as a handyman, said Detective John Heinzelman. Or he could be in a big city and blend in.
He gets paid cash, or he could be living in a big town. You get lost in the shuffle.
Some suggest that Fisher might have crossed the southern border of the United States. His disappearance occurred before the September 11th attacks, when border security was less stringent, which makes this a possible scenario. Police have speculated that Fisher may have started a new family, and they are concerned that he might eventually decide to leave and murder that family as well, as one of their main reasons for continuing the search. Despite ongoing efforts, some law enforcement officials have concluded that they may never discover what happened to him. Maybe this is the best we have, knowing that he did it and never finding him again, said Detective Heinzelman. FBI agent Bob Caldwell described Fisher's personality as arrogant, he's cocky, he's a know-it-all, and a loner. Fisher is known to chew tobacco, especially the Copenhagen brand. His appearance has been described as average, but he sometimes walks in an odd, erect manner with his chest out, likely due to a back injury he sustained while working as a firefighter. Fisher is an avid hunter and fisherman and is considered armed and extremely dangerous, with possible ties to Florida and New Mexico. Do you think Fisher could be living under a new identity somewhere, or did he meet a tragic end in the wilderness? Could new evidence or a fresh tip finally bring Fisher to justice, or will this case remain a haunting mystery? Comment down below. If you want more videos like this, please consider dropping a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on more true crime videos. Take care, and see you in the next one.